Let's pretend it's 2010 and get into compception.
Perfect.
Let's talk compositions. We've already covered them a little bit in the scene here by designing the spaceship in one composition, the beam in one composition, the alien in one composition, then pulling those different elements together in the spaceship itself, and then pulling that spaceship into a separate composition to create our final scene. And this is the way that it would work in a live action scenario, where you have your stage, and on that stage you have your director and your camera guy and the boom operator and everybody else behind the scenes and behind the camera. In front of the camera, you have your actors center stage. In the background, they have certain props and assets and different elements bringing together the entire scene. That's why I prefer to use this workflow, because it means that I can focus on one element at a time. I can then bring that all together for my final scene, and when I need to make any updates along the way, that's also very easy. But let's say that we want to bring in some more elements in the same style as the spaceship to tie it all together. Let's start off by creating a planet, by creating a new composition. And because the last composition that we created was the scene we're in at the moment, it's going to save that width and height. But what I want to change is that to 3000 by 3000. For all of my assets, I use that resolution. And I'm going to name this planet. So now I have a clean composition with nothing inside of it, where I can just worry about designing a planet. As mentioned before, I could use the ellipse tool, but I prefer to use the rounded rectangle, because with that one I can move between a rectangle or a circle depending on what I change the roundness to. I'm going to scale it down, turn up the roundness, and just give it a black stroke. 20 pixels, and change the color to be a grayish color like the moon, so we can see it. So by changing the roundness, I'm able to go between square and a circle, or somewhere between. And that gives me a bit more flexibility while working on the design. So this is my basic planet. And what's nice about working in animation compared to the real world is that the prop doesn't actually be finished before placing it into the scene. I can take this planet I have at the moment, I can place it where I want it to be in my scene, and I can always go back to it and make adjustments along the way. So let's go ahead and do that. In my scene, I'm going to take my planet composition, just drag it in. I'm going to place it below the lens flares, so they're affecting the planet as well. I'm just going to scale that down to 10. I'm going to place that over here. And then maybe I want to have a planet over on the right side as well. All I need to do is I need to duplicate that planet, Command D or Control D, move that over here. Then I can do the same thing again, move that over here. And this one I can scale it down a little bit. So now we have 3 planets, and I can always go into that composition and make any adjustment. So let's head into this one again, and maybe we want to add some details to this planet, so it's not just a gray sphere. So if this was the moon, we might want to have some of those craters in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my planet, duplicate it, and just go into the size and scale that down to, and I can just change the color to be slightly darker, like that. And then I'm going to take my, let's just name that crater, take that layer, duplicate it a few times, and just move it around the planet like this. Now, I'm purposely letting them overlap outside of the planet shape a little bit, because I want to give it a bit more of a 3D look, where they would sort of bend around that curvature of the planet. And to make this make sense, I'm going to select all of my craters, and I'm going to turn on the Preserve Underline Transparency, like so. Now, the problem we're running into by having them in different colors like this is that we're not getting one continuous outline around the entire shape when we're cutting into it with these shapes. You can see that when I move that off, I have that outline, but it's cutting into it when I place it like this. I'm just going to take the planet, duplicate that, and move it to the very top, and rename that layer Planet Outline, and just turn off the fill. So now we have just the outline on a separate layer that's placed on top of everything else, like so. What we can also do, just like we did with the spaceship, is just take our pen tool and draw a shape for our shadow that could cover this part of the planet. And I don't need a stroke, but I want to have a black fill. Then I'll just turn down the opacity to something like 20% and hit the preserve underline transparency on that one as well. Name that to be shadow. Because the shadow is on a separate layer like this, where it is only applied to the alpha channel below it, I can also add a blur to this layer alone if I wanted to change the style of it to have a bit of a softer edge right here. So I can again add the fast box blur, like we learned about in the last lesson. And if I think that this outline of the shape is a little bit annoying, I can just go down here and toggle mask and shape path visibility off for now. Now I can turn up the blur radius, and I'm getting a softer edge here, which might be what I'm going for in this example. So we're back in our scene, and now we can see that planet that we just created has now been updated with the new design that we did inside of that composition on all three places. And this is the big benefit of designing everything in its own composition compared to just drawing a circle like this in the scene, where you think that this is going to be all that I need, this is going to be my planet, I'm just going to duplicate that around, and then you realize, oh no, I should have added some more detail to it. Then you need to do that on one of the layers, duplicate it again and move it around, and it's a very annoying way of working, where it's much better to compartmentalize everything as much as possible, so you have your planet composition where you can only worry about the planet, and then you populate your scene with that planet composition that is continuously being updated if you make any adjustments inside the composition itself. So we have 3 planets in place, or actually we have 3 moons in place, which might not be what we're looking for, but we know that we want to have 3 different planetary shapes in the background. But we want to have 1 moon and then 2 other planet-looking things. What we can do by working this way is that we can take one design and place it wherever we want to have it, and then we can update the design of that asset later. We can make changes directly in the planet composition, but what we can also do is we can go over to the project panel, and we can take planet over here. I'm just going to name that planet 1, and you'll see it's updated in the timeline as well. They're all using planet 1 as their source at the moment. I can take planet 1, and you'll see it command D to duplicate it, and I can go into planet 2. And for this one, let's just say that we want to have no craters at all, and we want to have a blue planet instead. So we just made that adjustment inside of planet 2. We can go back to our scene. Nothing has changed in here yet because we're still just using 3 copies of planet 1. But what we can do now is we can select one of them. I'm going to select this small one down here, and I can take planet 2. If I hold down Alt on my keyboard and I drag planet 2 on top of planet 1, it's now going to replace that composition. But it's keeping the size, the position, and everything else that I've decided on in my scene. Because all of my assets are going to be 3000 by 3000, and I use that as the same starting point for everything that I can create, I can very easily populate my scene with one base asset for the templates in this case, and then I can easily replace that with something else. To give a different example, let's say that we want to replace the planet up here in the upper right corner, but we don't want to replace it with a planet. Maybe we want to replace it with a satellite instead. So what I can do is I can just create a new composition, name that satellite, and I'm using same resolution as before. Now I have a clean composition where I need to just worry about the satellite design. We could make this super complicated, or we can just stick to something very simple for the sake of this demonstration. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use all of the techniques that we've discussed previously about working with shape layers for design, and make a simple looking satellite just in a few minutes. So Nothing fancy here, just using similar techniques to what I've shown before, and in a few minutes I was able to create something that could pass off as a design for a satellite in a similar style to what we're using in the rest of everything that we're creating. I'm gonna head back to my scene, and again, my satellite is 3000 by 3000, same resolution as all my other assets, which means that I can take my planet over here, just hold down Alt and drag my satellite on top of my planet, and that's now replaced with my satellite instead. I can just rotate that a little bit and I can move that around freely in the background. One final benefit of working this way is because shape layers in After Effects are technically vector, but you're not really able to export vector images from After Effects. That's a pretty big limitation, where a lot of projects that you're working on, you may want to use those assets for other things in the future. When you're designing everything in After Effects, that's not really possible to do in a good way. So the reason why I create my assets in this big resolution, which is much larger than 1920 by 1080, which is what the end result is going to be of the video, when I have my assets created by 3000 by 3000 pixels, I'm able to export high resolution PNG files of all of those assets if needed. So if I want to export my satellite here as a separate PNG file, I can just go to Composition, Save Frame as File, and then we'll just save that on the desktop. In the output module, instead of Photoshop, which it's probably set to by default, I can click here and I can change it to be PNG sequence, RGB plus alpha, so I'm not getting any background here, I'm getting the transparency just like I have in my composition, and that again is why I'm building every asset on their own, where they're completely separate from the scene they're supposed to be placed in. I'm just looking at my asset here on a transparent background. And right now I am set to full resolution in my composition, but I typically tend to work in half or maybe even quarter resolution when I'm working on heavy files. So just to be safe, instead of having the render settings set to current settings, I like to change this to be set to best. Same for resolution, full, so that no matter what my size, my resolution is down here in my scene, it's always going to export at the full resolution. And then I can just hit render. And now I have an exported PNG of my satellite, 3000 by 3000 pixels, directly from After Effects, and I have everything in good quality here.
Pretty clever, right? This is when we start to get into using After Effects for real. There's a lot of things to think about, not just the way a program works, which cool button to press or what the hottest new plugin is. It's a lot about sort of figuring out, how do I approach this problem in the best way possible? How do I structure my files in the correct way? If you want to get into some cooler stuff, in the next one, we're talking about something that's really nice, and it's called essential properties. So if you want to know what that is, hit the link. And if you don't want to know what that is and just figure out what other cool stuff is going on here, hit the like instead, hit the subscribe instead, and learn a bunch of cool stuff.